Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk speaking. Now, first of all, thank you so very much for listening to the podcast. Now, I am very excited to let you know that the podcast is now available on Amazon Alexa. You know the drill. Simply say, Alexa, play Public Relations Review Podcast, and she'll take it from there. And again, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy the program, please become a subscriber. Now, on to the podcast.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review Podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to the Public Relations Review Podcast and to our listeners all across America and around the world. Now, Apple has ranked this podcast among the top 1% of podcasts worldwide. And recently, FeedSpot listed this podcast as number 13 on its top 70 best public relations podcasts in the United States. So thank you to all of our guests and listeners for your continued support. And if you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review. Now, question for the audience. Can old school public relations strategies achieve successful outcomes by adopting modern digital approaches? Well, my guest today says absolutely yes. His journey from South Africa to Los Angeles was fueled by his passion for creative storytelling. He is a former creative executive at Amazon Workplace. Now, currently, he is the CEO and creative director of Emeritus Media, with offices both in Los Angeles, California, and Tampa, Florida. Emeritus Media provides a range of services that include search engine optimization, digital marketing, web design, and much more. So joining me today from Los Angeles, California, is Mike Falco, CEO of Emeritus Media. So, Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me.
So we had been talking earlier that we wanted to talk about what are some of these old school strategies that need to be, updated, if you will, and bring in digital platforms. So let's begin. I think you started that branding perhaps is one of the more important things that we need to do. How are we going to go about doing that? Tell us the next steps there.
Yeah, well, one of the things that often gets conflated, and so I think it's important to define these terms up front, where marketing, advertising, and public relations has become conflated and it has become confused, certainly in more recent times. But if you just think of it in terms of very simple statements, where public relations is essentially your relationship with your public or your audience, as in managing your reputation within that group of people. And then marketing could be seen as a way to attract your customers, and then advertising being that you are sort of promoting in a paid sense through ads and so on. So like the billboard in the town square would be advertising, the person handing out flyers and talking to you would be marketing, and you sitting down and chatting with someone one-on-one would be more a public relations type activity.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned branding, where that's essentially creating your business identity and how you're recognized and known. And it matters because it gives your audience something that sticks in their mind as who you are and how you're represented. And from there, it builds trust and loyalty and helps you stand out. And the combining of the old school techniques, the reason why I feel that's important is because really where the definitions of these terms have become confused, the activities as a result have been confused and sort of mushed together. And I think by understanding that old school approaches of public relations were essentially always aimed at making your good works well known to the public. And so if you keep that in mind, while using more modern tools and the digital tools that you have at your disposal nowadays, the approach is everything. And so that can really sort of govern and monitor how you create strategy.
So let's define then how that approach, as you see it, how should that approach be initiated? What should be included in that approach particularly if we're going to be using digital platforms?
Well, I'll give you a silly example, right? So if you take you have a brand and they're interested in doing some online reputation or online public relations, and then you have someone who doesn't have this mindset, they go, okay, well, let's do some Facebook ads. Well, you're doing the wrong thing. You're now in the realm of advertising, or let's do some Google ads or something. That again, those are advertising aids. But if you were to create a thought leadership article series, let's say it's a skincare brand, on the technology that goes into the creation of these products and the certain skin conditions and why they're important to a person and what medical ramifications that might have for a person, and do like this series of thought leadership articles that are helpful and useful to the reader. As a positioning, then that creates goodwill in the reader, and they then associate you as a brand with that helpful and useful information.
In developing, let's say, just those thought leaders, let's talk about some of the platforms that are used to help accomplish these things. So if we're going to talk again about branding, what are some of the platforms that we can begin to use, or basically I should say that are actually already being used to accomplish these achievements?
In terms of branding or online PR?
Well, let's look at both.
All right. Well, take PR, for example. I mean, there's so many tools nowadays where you can create your online real estate very easily, where, even 10, 15 years ago, building a website, even just a small informational website, would have been quite costly depending on who you go to. But nowadays, you can create a blog through WordPress or Wix or Shopify or any number of these platforms that have made it very easy for someone to go on and create an online platform for themselves. There's other places like Medium where you can create a profile and start publishing articles. LinkedIn is another great one, where you can start going on there and sharing information and publishing articles and newsletters and so on and so forth, where you can build this sort of thought leadership around your brand and the information that you're providing to your audience. Branding, on the other hand, from what I can tell, the technology hasn't quite caught up, although AI is getting there. But AI is still, in my mind, a useful tool for efficiency rather than a creative tool. It can have some creative uses, but it still requires a human creative mind to give you the prompts, to interpret the prompts, to interpret the results that the language models spit out at you. And so a designer and a creative director and a branding expert are still indisposable in terms of creating a brand and building a brand book and creating an architecture of your messaging and all of those things that go along with the building of a brand.
Mm-hmm. As I listen to that and you talk about building of a brand, there's so many digital platforms. One of the things that I see that I like that, as a matter of fact, I even use to help promote this podcast are some of the videos that use avatars. Mm-hmm. I like to use those. As a matter of fact, every episode that I do, once it's just before it's launched, I will put up one of these video avatars on places like LinkedIn, public relations and communications, and PRSA and so forth, to let people know that it is coming. And there's an avatar saying in a few words, here's what's coming, here's what it's going to be about, and you can get it on March the 10th or whenever that happens to be. And I think that certainly helps to boost people's attention to at least listening to this particular episode.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of useful tools, like you say, that can help to boost your visibility, to help to attract customers. But again, that sort of falls under the headline of marketing, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So when it comes to branding itself, you have to understand who you are and how you want to present yourself to your public and what message you want to communicate through your channels of marketing and through your channels of public relations and advertising. But ultimately, you're the creative mind behind it. You're the sort of the man in the chair, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, any other guidelines you have in terms of, let's say, the branding, how to get the maximum benefits from that?
I think another really important thing, and this is where technology falls into the conversation as well, is that there are a lot of tools now that give you insights into your audience, whereas before, focus groups and surveys and like man on the street type things were required to really get a sense of the mindset of the people that you wish to speak to.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas nowadays, information is readily available. All you need is the tools to be able to capture that information and then analyze it. So analytics tools, Rand Fishkin is a PR professional, and he's got a company called Spark Toro and Metrical. And these online tools and the analytics tools are exceptionally useful and can sort of scrape the internet for sentiment so that you can understand your audience, so that you can then better communicate to that audience. And audience listening tools like that are exceptionally valuable, especially in the realm of PR, especially in the realm of marketing and advertising as well. Branding as well, if you're doing your research before constructing your brand look and everything else, helping to understand what it is that will resonate with your audience is something that we've just never in history had as a tool. And so you can have all of this data and all of this analytics that you can look at. I'll give you a silly example. There was a client that we had that their primary product was creating accessories for like hunting rifles, and they built scopes and things like that. So we did an audience listening campaign, and something that we discovered in the course of doing that was that there was an entire segment of their market that they had no idea about, and that was bird watchers. And there was this sort of subculture of bird watchers who gravitated towards this one particular scope that they made. And because it gave good quality of vision and range of vision, and it was handy, you could put it in your pocket and you could just pull it up to one eye and so on. There were all of these uses for this rifle scope that the bird watchers had found, but the company itself had no idea. It was this invisible group of customers that they knew nothing of, right? And so after this audience listening campaign, we presented this information to them, and we were like, well, there's thousands of potential sales in this area that you haven't been taking advantage of. And so it can really write the course of your marketing and advertising, and it can sort of guide you in a way that you wouldn't have known about previously. And these tools give you that information to give you that guidance.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned sentiment. You're absolutely right. I do recall. I don't think I've had a chance to use those yet, but it does let you know how people feel about or think about your services and/or products, which is something you need to know so that you can make the necessary adjustments to keep it in, so they'll still be a favorite thing that people would like to use. And also there are messaging tools. Go ahead.
You're exactly right. And the other really useful area of these kinds of tools is reputation management and crisis management, right? So previously, an event would happen, there would be some articles in a newspaper or something, and then, a PR agency would go into crisis management mode. And a lot of the research and a lot of the digging and listening would have to be done manually.
Right.
Whereas now you can take advantage of these tools and go, well, who's saying what? How do they feel about the subject we're investigating? And where are they saying it? That's the other thing, is it gives you areas. So if YouTube is one particular area where people are posting a lot of videos about a certain thing, or perhaps they're sticking only to Reddit or Substack or Discord or any one of these other forum type platforms, these tools will give you not only the sentiment but also the location.
And then from there, that's when your group has to get together, put their heads together, and decide on some sort of a program or effort to correct those mistakes or address those issues that are getting some negative responses from the client.
Right, exactly. And that's where old school sort of traditional PR technology comes into play, where you apply the rules of, is what they're saying true? Are they missing information? Do we need to fill the vacuum with true information, and so on and so forth? You can just go down the list. I mean, it's an old playbook, but if you're not familiar with that playbook, you can sort of be grasping at straws and being more reactive rather than proactive.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the other areas that you had mentioned, such as media relations. You know, one time you just sent out press releases and hoped that they got open, so forth and so on. Well, now there are programs that send it out to let you know that they've been opened and who looked at them, maybe how long they've got them. I think Cision and several others are some that actually do that for you.
Right, exactly. And there's an old sort of PR approach, which is, it's in the name, it's media relations. In other words, you should have a relationship with these journalists and help them do their job better. So if you have a client who is launching a new company, for example, and there's a business guy at the New York Times who you have a long-standing relationship with, then that's an easy pitch. Whereas if you're just sort of looking online and scraping for media opportunities and then cold emailing these guys going, here's my client, and sending out a press release or something, your response rate is going to be exponentially lower than if you've actually taken the time to develop these relationships and become colleagues with these people, essentially. Because they're just like anyone. They're trying to do their job as best they can. And if you can assist them in doing a better job, they're going to look better to their superiors. They're going to deliver better work for their readers, and so on and so forth. So it's a win all around to really take the time and play the long game. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, on that particular case, it's interesting that I have PR people. Obviously, I get at least maybe once a week minimum an email that says some folks would like to be on the show. Two things happen. One, some of those emails that I get, I look like they're shotgun blasts. They just say hello. They don't mention you or your show's name. Hello, how'd you like to talk about A, B, C, and D? The second part of it, some of it had nothing to do with public relations. I just got, I think, one the other day about some guy selling a book that had something to do with veterans. And I couldn't quite, so I don't even bother to respond to those. You know, as PR people, yes, you need to take some time because, you know, how do you ingratiate yourself sometimes, you know, because maybe you're on a new beat or this is a new product for you, so you've got to find out who covers these products. And I think that they've got those platforms out there that can tell you who covers what with what organization. And those are some of the things that you need to increase your chances of landing some placements.
Right, exactly. And again, the same applies like with what I was talking about before with your relationship with a media outlet, right? The same applies to a situation like this, or for that matter, any person who you're trying to talk to in a professional sense. The rules of communication apply, whether you're sending an email for the first time or whether you're, you know, reaching out for some kind of business benefit or anything else. You're still communicating. You're in the realm of communication, and therefore the rules of communication apply. If you were to walk up to someone on the street and go, hey, do this thing, your response is likely to not be good. Mm-hmm. But if you walk up to the person and say, hi, how are you? My name's Mike. What was your name? Very nice to meet you. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and establish some rapport. Get to know the person, have some sense of understanding, and let them know that you see them and you hear them, and that they are duplicated in some way, shape, or form by you, so that they then feel understood, and then all other manner of things apply, and just in the same sense as if you're making a new friend, mm-hmm. right? So, and we can sometimes lose sight of that because of these tools, that they're so immediate and they're so easy to use. Blast out 500 emails to 500 people without doing the work, but the work still has to be done. The communication is still a communication. And if we lose sight of that, we're not going to get as good a result.
While we're thinking about it, could you identify a few more of those platforms that people can actually use? And because I know for sentiment, there's a certain platform. If you're going to send out mass emails, there's certain ones that can tell you send them to the right reporter at the right magazine for the right topics. I forget a lot of them there, but if you can give us the names of some of those platforms and what they're used for, I think will help the listeners a lot to sort of know what direction they need to go in to get the job done.
Right. So, well, there's a number of approaches that you could use. I mean, specifically for reporters, there is some manual work that might need to be done, but there are other tools that you could use. I mean, almost as a silly example, you could put in a prompt to ChatGPT and say, I'm looking for the top 20 publications that cover the automobile industry. And so, scrape the internet, find me their websites. If they have a personal blog, please include that. And if there's an email address, and please include that, and give me a short description of what it is that they write about. Mm-hmm. So you can utilize AI tools like ChatGPT or Claude or any number of other options that are available to do that work for you. As far as whether or not the emails have been opened, that's another story. That's something that, if you're using a platform like Apollo or Constant Contact, that kind of thing, that'll give you those kinds of analytics from an email standpoint. Mm-hmm. But there's one tool that I've been using. I'm not sure if there's an email version of it for reporters necessarily, but there are tools that are available that will source podcasts, for example. That's how I found you. Was it kicks out a bunch of very specifically targeted subjects that you put in. You go, well, I'd like to know more about these people and these specific subjects, and it'll kick out 400 or 500 podcasts with a description of what they are about, and there's a link to the podcast so you can listen to it for yourself, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Right?
Now, what's the name of that platform? Do you recall the name of that one?
Oh, that's called Podpitch.
Podpitch, okay. Well, I think that's a good idea. A lot of people look for those things. Even though, as I said, I do get those shotgun sort of things that say, hello, how are you today, without mentioning your name or your podcast. Just throw it at you. So those, I think if
right. But even with a tool like that, you still need to do the work yourself. Mm-hmm. Because when you and I first connected on the phone, I had found you through this platform, but then when I got a response from you, I realized, well, if we're going to have an actual conversation person to person, it would be very poor form for me to pick up the phone and not know who you are, not having listened to at least one episode of your podcast and know a little bit about you. Because, if you're walking into a business meeting, you should know a little bit about the person who you're going to be speaking to. Mm-hmm. It's just common sense, right? So again, this goes back to my point about communication is communication no matter what the form. And so the rules of communication then apply. If you hypothetically take our situation, if we'd gotten on the phone and I'm like, well, tell me about yourself, Peter, I think your response would have been less friendly than if we picked up the phone and I was like, I listened to an episode of your podcast. I really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of commonality on these subjects and so on. And so it gives you an opportunity to develop a relationship where one didn't exist before, but you also need to put in the work.
Well, I certainly agree with that. And just let me comment again, because there are some PR people. The last one I got was from a PR agency. It must have been an intern that it was just a shotgun approach. Hello, how are you today? I think you'd love to interview my boss so-and-so and so-and-so about A, B, C, and D. So I've looked at it, and, one of the things I think you need to be careful about is that they can talk on about subjects such as this, and this. Well, one of them I take a very sharp look at is when people talk about crisis communications. That is a huge topic. It's one thing if you have a fire drill in your building, fine, you can tell everybody what to do. But if, I used to work on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and when a reporter calls you at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon to say that your congressman is on a list of people who floated checks, you've got a problem because they're all gone. Mm-hmm. It's Friday afternoon. Mm-hmm. Nothing you can do. Well,
that's right.
So, what do you do? The first thing that worked for me is that I did have a relationship with the reporter. And I did tell him, obviously, I can't answer you that question right now. But when we get back Monday morning, I will not only talk to the congressman, but the people who handles these things for him. And once we get all that worked out, we're going to invite you over and show you the paperwork that says that he should not have been on that. And so that worked out real well. I mean, and he appreciated that. And because he should not have been on that, I also called people from Associated Press, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and had them come as well. And they all agreed that it should not have happened. It was a mistake that happened somewhere in the Capitol Hill, the bank on Capitol Hill, for senators and congressmen. But they did put a retraction on in the paper. But the problem for me is that when they announced it on Saturday morning, it was on the front page. The retraction was buried in the back there somewhere.
Right. It usually is.
Right. So at least that,
a retraction doesn't get quite the readership as a sensational headline.
That's exactly right. I mean, but you learn, but at least we were able to manage the thing, so that so we've never had that happen before. And I've seen other people who, in particular, crisis communications, have never really had any serious training about that, and they can probably cause more problems than they can solve because they have not had it. It is not something that, and I tell people, you just can't go into maybe a seminar and sit for a few hours and think, now you're prepared for crisis communications. It is not that easy because something's going to come down the pike that you still can't handle. So, you sometimes you just have to, be in the firing line on these things and take some punches on the first few to learn how to really handle that sort of thing.
Right. And again, I mean, your relationship with those journalists, it counts for something.
It does.
Because, even if the person who's employing you has gotten themselves into some hot water, they have a pre-existing relationship with you, and so therefore there's trust and so on and so forth, that if something goes on, you can still have a cordial conversation with them and go, listen, here's what's happening. Can you cover this? This is the information we'd like to provide to you. And then you can also have a future longevity of relationship with that same journalist and go, look, okay, so there was this explosion here and here's how it was handled, and I appreciate the retraction. Thank you very much. Here's a story you might be interested in. Mm-hmm. And then you can have a good relationship moving forward from there as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's always important, and particularly also when some reporters move on to maybe larger, more prestigious publications. At least you can call them up and maybe congratulate them on the job. And hey, look, if I've got something down, that you might be interested in, I'd like to be able to give you a call about it, and they would appreciate that too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an old sort of idea in Hollywood of like, if you get represented by an agent, make sure you make friends with the assistants.
Oh, absolutely.
Because in 10 years from now, they're going to be the agents, right? So, but that's almost like a personal PR approach of like, I value my relationships, I value the colleagues that I work with, and so if I'm going to make a contact with someone, whether we can benefit one another now or not is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is we have a new relationship that for one or both of us is going to become useful to either today, tomorrow, or down the road.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, let me ask you now if you have any sort of closing remarks you'd like to make about, engaging the modern digital approaches to, old school ways of doing things.
Well, I think it's a holistic approach. I think if you're young and you're an expert at, digital technology, that's great. But take the time to learn the subject that you're in. Know the subject and learn the old school traditional ways of doing things and understand communication as a subject. And then if if you're an old school traditional person who barely uses email, you might want to touch up on some of the new tools that are around, because they are going to be helpful. I had a chat with a guy named Shel Holtz, who's we're both senior fellows over at the conference board, and I interviewed him on our podcast, and he said something really interesting. He said, there's a lot of talk about AI and people being afraid that AI is going to take your job. The truth of the matter is AI is not going to take your job, but the kid who knows how to use AI will take your job.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, for those of us in the sort of over 40 range and above, it's really important for us to keep up, because it is a digital world. We do need to understand these tools. And if we can bring those two disciplines together, I think that's a winning combination.
Well, I can certainly agree with you on that. I have gone to artificial intelligence, built around this podcast, and I use it. Like once the podcast is done, it will produce a transcript for me. It'll identify like speaker 1 and 2. I just go in and fill in the names. It also comes up with pieces for Facebook and the others that I can look at them and the few amount of words and just send them right off if I want to make changes. Produces blogs. So I mean, all of that sort of stuff is done probably within an hour. Now I just don't take and run with it. I always read it and make changes if I want to and so forth. But it's such a time-saving tool to have to be able to use these new tools.
Yeah. That's exactly right, and that's how I view it as well. I view it through the lens of an efficiency tool. If you look at the Industrial Revolution, right, and compare it to that, and you go, okay, well, people were tilling fields by hand, and it took X amount of hours to get a wheat field done. And all of a sudden, there was a new machine that came along that could do that for you in the space of 30 minutes. That's an efficiency tool. Mm-hmm. And so in a similar vein, you look at AI technology and you go, well, it can do all this grunt work for me that would have taken me an entire day to put together. And, my fingers would have been tired from typing and all the rest. But it becomes this assistant for all of the heavy lifting, all of the grunt work. And then it frees you up to do the more strategic, more creative, more sort of high-level type activities that you wouldn't have had the time to do otherwise.
Well, Mike, let me say thank you so very much for being on the Public Relations Review podcast. We certainly have appreciated you sharing your wisdom with us. And I can certainly sign on to it because I have used a lot of the new stuff and look forward to even more of it coming down the pike. So I'd like to say thank you for bringing this to our attention and sharing this information with our listeners.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I really did enjoy chatting with you.
Well, thank you. And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed the show, we certainly would appreciate getting a review from you and also sharing this information with your colleagues. And also, don't forget to listen to the next edition of the Public Relations Review podcast.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast and have a great day.